In the year 1980, the widely read German magazine Der Spiegel decided to finance an expedition to a remote part of the world. The editors, wanting to profit from the bubbling mania caused by a series of eerie and violent happenings which took place in Canada's wild Northwest Territories, arranged for 3 former US airborne troops to go there, stay for 1 month, and document everything that they experienced. Such, it was hoped, would unlock the secrets of the Nahanni National Park, specifically of Deadmen's Valley, an untamed stretch of river that cuts through the sheer-faced, rugged and cave-riddled second canyon of the Nahanni Valley, so named because of its association with a string of inexplicable deaths and disappearances. My name is Laura, and you are watching The Paranormal Scholar. Before we delve deep into this case, please allow a quick moment for me to thank Established Titles for kindly sponsoring this video, as certainly what would a video on the subject of a national park, even one as dark and dangerous as Nahanni be, without taking time to admire and appreciate the beauty of the natural world. Established Titles is a unique project which makes use of Scottish tradition to enable you to call yourself Lord or Lady, all while helping to preserve picturesque woodlands around the world. Based on a historic custom whereby landowners are referred to as lairds or lords and ladies, Established Titles allows you to purchase at least 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in rural Scotland. Each title is formalised by an official certificate, bearing a crest as well as your unique plot number, with which you can find the exact location of your land. Such allows you in perpetuity to be known by the style and title of Lord or Lady, meaning you could officially change your name to use your newly obtained excellency on credit cards, plane tickets, and dinner reservations. Most wonderful of all, however, is how with every purchase, Established Titles plants a tree, with them working with charities including Trees for the Future to support global reforestation efforts. An eccentric way to augment your status and thus humble your peers, Established Titles Lordships and Ladyships packs also make lovely gifts, with their couples packs coming with adjoining plots of land. And even better, Established Titles has told me that the first 200 people purchasing a title pack using my link will effectively be next to my plot within a few minutes of walking. So depending upon how many of you want to become lords or ladies, we can build our own suitably peculiar paranormal kingdom together in the midst of rural Scotland. At the moment, Established Titles is running an appropriately grand Labour Day sale. Plus, if you use the code Paranormal Scholar, you will get an additional 10% off. Simply go to establishedtitles.com/Paranormal Scholar or check out the link in the description to get your gifts and help to support conservation efforts in an exciting and memorable way. Thank you. Now on with the video. Selected for their impressive combat experience and ability to survive in extreme conditions, the 3 US airborne troops were sent to Deadmen's Valley. Also known as the Valley of the Headless Men, this area of wilderness is inaccessible by car, with no roads in or out of the national park, and boats and bush planes being the preferred method of transport. Even so, for military veterans, such an expedition should have been easy. However, only 2 days after arriving in the valley, the former paratroopers sent a message via radio stating that they were in trouble. Some sort of strange fog had descended over their camp, and indeed the entire valley. Shortly after that, communication with the team was lost. They were never heard from again. This is but one of many sensational stories attached to Canada's Nahanni National Park. Another, said to have occurred in 1990, saw 3 students venture into Deadmen's Valley, only to be found later dead and decapitated. In the late 1970s, a research team headed by an American explorer and paranormal researcher sent out an SOS in which they claimed something had emerged from the cliff. When a rescue team flew in to retrieve them, nothing was found. save for the headless body of one of the researchers. As horrifying as these reports are, it would be disingenuous to label them as fact. After all, there is little to substantiate them, with their details confined to obscure online forums and citationless articles, any evidence that they may have been real having either been lost, obfuscated, or never there to begin with. And yet, these rumours, if that is all they are, grew out of something very real, with the Valley of the Headless Men having a long and well-documented history in which death, specifically involving decapitation, is a reoccurring theme. Indeed, some have even claimed that no less than 44 people have gone missing within the national park, with up to another 14 said to have been found missing their heads. The valley's reputation finds its origin in the legends and beliefs of First Nation peoples. In particular, the Dene, natives of the Northland comprising roughly 21 different tribes, have long spoken of an evil residing in the valley. According to their tradition, there once existed a tribe known as the Naha. These were warlike people, who the Dene often suffered at the hands of, having their settlements pillaged and their women and children taken. One day, so Dene legend goes, a party of Dene warriors decided to retaliate against their ancient enemies. However, when they arrived at the Naha camp, they were left confused. There was no one there. With campfires and teepees abandoned, it was as though the entire camp had vanished into thin air. This strangeness was ascribed to a greater evil. Something had happened to the warlike Naha. Recalling the peculiar sounds, the wailing and midnight howls that echoed through the canyons when the wind was right, the Dene warriors are said to have retreated. After all, having grown up listening to the campfire stories of their elders, they knew that the valley contained something monstrous, with rumours alluding to aggressive, hairy giants who called the valley's extensive cave systems home, as well as a tribe of cannibalistic mountain men. And so the Naha were never seen again, and the Dene acquired another spooky campfire story. Yet, far from being a fiction invented to terrify children, the existence of dangerous beings within the valley has been attested to by others outside of the Dene tribes. In the 1830s, explorers from the Hudson Bay Company pushed deep into the Nahanni Valley, travelling its twisting rivers in search of a route to the Pacific. Whilst there, they are said to have encountered a tribe of mountain warriors. Surrounded on all sides, these people were aggressive and unhappy about their territory being violated. The explorers, however, were not touched. At the command of a beautiful, pale-skinned chiefess, the warriors drew back and allowed the explorers to pass. Later, she would be referred to as the White Queen, with the HBC explorers speculating that had she not intervened, her warriors would have killed and devoured them. Thus, the legend of a cannibalistic tribe within what is now the Nahanni National Park grew. Some named them Nahanni Indians, a lost people who had descended into consuming their fellow man, who had once dominated the valley. Others speculated that they were a relic of man's evolution, a race of tool-wielding, fur-wearing primitive hominids who cooked the bodies of their victims. Their men, Neanderthal-like and no more than 5 feet tall, wore their beards long. These were given the name Nukluk, meaning man of the bush. Writing in his 1999 book on Bigfoot and other mysterious primates, the well-regarded cryptozoologist Lauren Coleman details the activities of 1964, when multiple witnesses are said to have encountered a small, dark, upright hominid creature covered with black hair within the Nahanni region. The first sighting took place in April, close to where the Liard River splits into the South Nahanni River. John Baptist, a native from the Fort Liard settlement, was out trapping with several others when they were approached by the creature. It is said to have been strong-looking and growled at the trappers before fleeing into the trees. As fearsome as this hominid may have been, it is far from the only formidable cryptid reported to lurk in the Nahanni Valley. Another, known as the Nahanni, has been described as far worse. Giant and Sasquatch-like, with brown or dark red hair, red eyes, and a foul odour, this being has supposedly left many fearing for their lives. After all, one of its most notable qualities is how it provokes an intense feeling of dread when encountered. Writing in 1876, the French missionary Father Émile Petitot, who lived alongside native people, described how they live at times in continual terror of an imaginary enemy who pursues them without rest and who they believe to see everywhere. This enemy, so it is said, would lurk outside of settlements, whistling and making noises resembling human laughter, waiting to attack. So terrified of these menacing creatures were the Dene that at certain times of year they would abandon their camps and take shelter on lake islands, believing that the Nahanni were unable to cross the water to reach them. For part of the year, the tribes were safer, with it written that they believed the Nahanni to be cave dwellers who hibernated for the winter. When they did emerge, it was a matter of avoiding them at all costs. A description dating to 1950 states that those who had seen them reported them to be twice the size of ordinary humans, who never missed a chance to carry off unwary hunters or stray women in their powerful gorilla-like arms. Disturbingly, these creatures have also been said to be able to hypnotize their victims. The Nahanni and their horrifying reputation for stealing women can be linked to one of the most unsettling disappearances to have occurred in the Nahanni Valley. It was the summer of 1926, and a young Annie Lafferty was travelling with her cousin Mary, her husband Paul Field, and a group of natives from Fort Simpson on a hunting trip into the valley. Supposedly, the group had just spent the winter trapping deep in the Mackenzie Mountains and were on their way to one of the trading posts situated along the Liard River. One morning, after setting up camp along the route, Annie could not be found. She had disappeared in the night. Paul Field, along with 5 of the native hunters, immediately formed a search party and went to find her. Picking up her trail, they followed her into the woods. According to the description provided by author Dick Turner in his 1975 book on Nahanni, these trackers struggled to pursue the trail. Allegedly, it was as though she had travelled on the wings of the wind, with bits of shredded clothing being found hanging from tree branches at irregular intervals. Strangest of all, however, was how her tracks stopped at the bottom of a very high and rugged cliff. There was nothing to indicate that she had travelled left or right, only up. Unable to pursue her, with the mountainside being too sheer to climb, the men took another route to reach the top. Incredibly, they found her trail again, suggesting that Annie had scaled the cliffside, shedding items of clothing along the way. After 9 days, with Annie still missing, the men were forced to turn back and leave her to what they could only assume must have been her demise. Several months later, this strange story evolved to become stranger still. The hunting party having returned to civilization, Annie's disappearance was able to be reported on by the press. When seen by a local hunter known only as Charlie, he approached the police with a terrifying testimony. He believed he had seen Annie when he himself was out hunting in the Nahanni Valley at the same time as the others. Camped on the shore of Flat River, he was woken by the sound of stones dropping into the water. Rising to investigate the noise, he is said to have seen, illuminated only by the light of the moon, a girl running, naked, on all fours up the side of the cliff. Her movements were like an animal, and on her face was the most abhorrent expression. Her mouth, a gaping grimace, she bore a rictus grin, her eyes wide and wild as she periodically stopped to look around, before continuing to drag herself up the sheer rock, sending pebbles tumbling into the water below as she did. Horrified, Charlie could not believe his eyes, and in the morning dismissed it as a dream, not thinking of it again until he saw the newspaper's report on Annie's disappearance. Despite informing the police, his story was never taken seriously, with Annie being presumed to have succumbed to the valley's wilderness. Today, some have suggested that Annie was a victim of the Nahanni, made mad through hypnotism and driven to the cliffside and the caves in which they dwelt. And madness is not the only thing that those who have entered the valley have suffered. After all, the Nahanni National Park's most well-known and indeed infamous location is Deadmen's Valley, also known as the Valley of the Headless Men, attesting to the many mysterious decapitations that have happened there. The most famous story began in 1904 with the prospecting brothers Willie, Frank and Charlie McLeod. Made hungry by rumours of gold within the wilderness of the Nahanni region, they are said to have travelled along Flat River and struck it rich, before losing much of their haul when their boat capsized. Despite trying to regain their wealth, returning to the site where they had mined their haul, the brothers eventually returned to civilization empty-handed. After such an arduous journey into what can only be described as a truly vast region of untamed and inhospitable nature, it was undoubtedly a disappointment. And so the following year, the two younger brothers, Willie and Frank, returned to Nahanni, accompanied by another prospector, invariably named Wade and Weir. When Charlie McLeod did not hear from his brothers, he assumed that they must have succeeded in their intention and found gold, having chosen to remain within the valley in order to exploit their claim. And yet, when months became years, it was clear something must have gone wrong. Forming a search party with other experienced outdoorsmen, Charlie McLeod set off for Flat River. By boat, they combed the shoreline, looking for any sign of the missing brothers and their partner. Even when they passed the spot where Charlie, Willie and Frank had originally found gold, there was no sign of anyone being there. And so they continued up the river until they reached the Big Bend, a fork in the water from which Flat River split from the much larger South Nahanni River. Still searching for the missing men, the party drifted into Second Canyon, a tremendous 15-kilometre, 9-mile stretch of river surrounded on either side by massive sheer cliffs, flecked with inaccessible cave openings. Here, there was very little shoreline, with the cliffs, some of them stretching as high as 3,000 feet, immediately bordering the river. As the search party neared First Canyon, the shoreline began to widen, and there, on it, Charlie spotted what appeared to be the remains of a camp. Upon investigation, a body was found. Its clothes charred as if burnt, it was reaching for a nearby rifle that was leaning against a tree. The most horrific part, however, was that it was missing its head. Searching the camp further, Charlie and the others discovered a second body on the floor, half in, half out of a tent. This too was headless. Bizarrely, there were no signs of the missing heads. After searching some more, personal items found on the two bodies identified them as Charlie's brothers. The third man, dead or alive, was nowhere to be found. Supposedly, the words "We have found a fine prospect" were discovered carved into a tree at the campsite, suggesting that the McLeod brothers had struck gold. There was, however, no gold, either on the bodies or anywhere in the camp, with the sluices and equipment they had brought with them also missing. When news of the brothers' deaths reached civilization, people were horrified. Who or what could have done this to the men, and where were their heads? Local police stated that they must have succumbed to the elements, and that animals had mutilated their bodies. When a third skeleton was discovered further along the river, it was said this was the other missing man, and that he, too, must have suffered a similar horrific, albeit accidental, fate as his partners. And yet, as much as the authorities pushed the conclusion that there was nothing untoward about the prospectors' passings, many in the area believed otherwise. After all, the valley had an evil reputation. Cannibals, lost tribes, monsters and giants, all being associated with its winding rivers and terrific canyons. Had the bestial, ape-like Nahanni twisted the men's heads from their very bodies? Or had the highly territorial Nahanni Indians, their sanguine urges no longer kept in check by the White Queen, decapitated the intruding prospectors? Whatever the case, before too long, the stretch of river within Second Canyon where the MacLeods were discovered earned a sinister reputation, being dubbed Deadmen's Valley. For many years, and indeed into the present day, the brutal story of the MacLeod brothers has been the centerpiece of the Nahanni Valley's terrifying reputation. And so, told as a campfire tale, embellished, made even more abhorrent, and used as a warning lest others acquire any similar notions of prospecting in Nahanni, the tale of the two headless men was not forgotten, least of all by Charlie MacLeod. In the aftermath of the tragedy, he offered no conclusion as to what he believed had happened to his younger brothers, choosing silence instead of indulging in the fantastical stories associated with the valley. Then, many years later, the Canadian writer and northern explorer Philip Henry Godsoll interviewed Charlie about what had happened. In his book, Pilots of the Purple Twilight, Godsoll reports Charlie saying, "The murderer was my brother's partner, Wade." Under no illusion of mythical monsters or cannibal tribes, Charlie MacLeod described having found Wade going under an assumed name. For years he'd worked on one of the railroads, then on a lonely homestead, haunted always by the memory of his crime. Breaking under the strain, unable to stand it any longer, he climbed up on a haystack, set fire to it, then sent a bullet crashing into his head. Charlie also told Godsoll that he had spoke to him many times, with Wade even confessing everything to Charlie before he ended his own life. Gold had been his motive. And yet, far from being put to rest, the story of the Headless Men grew, being fueled, bizarrely, by the discovery of even more Headless Men. Sensationally, Charlie MacLeod, while searching the area, even stumbled upon one. To Godsoll, he described finding a tumble-down cabin. At its door was the headless skeleton of a large man. Beside it, overgrown with weeds, lay a broken rifle, the barrel badly bent. The man's head, it seems, was nowhere in sight. In 1913, another prospector by the name of Martin Jurgensen was also found decapitated. Then again, in 1945, another, this time a 40-year-old French-Canadian called Ernest Savard, was discovered similarly headless, tucked inside his sleeping bag, otherwise intact. In addition to this, there have been many, many other reports of missing or diversely deceased people within the national park, from the strange instance of a prospector called John O'Brien being seemingly flash-frozen while sitting in front of a fire, to the 1928 disappearance of Angus Hall, who some report vanished into thin air, leaving only a footprint behind. Even as recently as 2005, 2 men from Fort Simpson were found dead under mysterious circumstances after heading into the wilderness just north of the Nahanni Valley, so as to spend the summer in a friend's cabin. According to a report by the CBC, one man's body was found in the thick bush, almost 4 kilometers away from the cabin. The other was found in the North Nahanni River, about 20 kilometers away from the cabin. Discovered at a considerable distance from each other, the police concluded one had drowned and the other died of hypothermia. How or why this had happened, we do not know. And so, whilst there may be many difficult to prove rumours associated with the national park, and even cases such as the deaths of the MacLeod brothers, which lead nowhere paranormal, there are many genuine, inexplicable incidents that have occurred within or close to Deadmen's Valley. Not only this, for those who may be dismissive of the folklore of the Dene, there are proven physical oddities in the region. For example, somewhere within the national park there is said to exist a tropical valley, a place wildly dissimilar to the harsh alpine tundra and wintry forests of spruce and aspen that blanket Nahanni. Described by explorers, trappers and traders as early as the 19th century, this tropical place is claimed to be snow-free all year round. boasting luxurious tropical vegetation sustained by fertile black soil and the warmth of innumerable hot springs. In Lost World, the fauna is said to be likewise luxurious, with animals fattened on the abundant lush greenery. In the most fantastical stories, this tropical oasis was also said to be home to incredible animals, mammoths and pterodactyls, as well as long-extinct carnivorous bear dogs. It was said to be a land of giants, and as such spawned theories that Nahanni may even conceal the entrance to the center of the earth, where such extinct colossi thrive, the giant red-eyed Nahanni presumably being among them. And remarkably, whilst the giants are still disputed, a tropical valley, or rather tropical pockets, are known to exist within the Nahanni National Park. A document released by the Canadian Department of Northern Affairs conceded that small areas of lush vegetation have indeed been found near the Liard River, with hot springs having been visited by numerous government officials over the decades. Today, one can even book a holiday to the park so as to enjoy the once disputed, pristine hot springs. Similarly extensive cave systems, rumoured to be the home of Nahanni and other monstrous beings, exist in the park. Some, which overlook the South Nahanni River of MacLeod fame, are known to extend into the cliffside for miles, with people even whispering that they contain lost cities. For now, many of these areas are closed off, with the management of the national park stating that they are too fragile to be explored freely, with visits being limited to park-approved scientific research. Elsewhere in the park, there are other restricted areas, with closures said to have been put in place so as to protect and preserve its unique nature. For those in the know, however, there is said to be another reason, that Nahanni is simply too dangerous for people to visit, and that the national park knows this and is keen to keep its secrets out of public hands. For indeed, whilst Nahanni Valley is exceptionally beautiful, a rare place of pristine nature in a modern and almost entirely explored world, just like tales of lost paratroopers and endless headless bodies, it would be disingenuous to say that the preservation of the natural world is the national park's sole interest. For certainly, in the heart of the Nahanni Reserve, a large area of land has been carved out, not protected by the same law which keeps the rest of Nahanni Valley safe for public understanding, appreciation and enjoyment. At Prairie Creek, a mine of tremendous proportions, operated by the mine developer Norzinc, plans to increase production to suck out an average annual payable zinc production of £261 million, worth around 430 million Canadian dollars a year, not to mention the silver and lead that are transported from the site along its private all-season road. As far as can be discerned, no headless men have been reported at this mine, suggesting that not all prospectors have been chased away from Nahanni Valley by territorial tribes and aggressive ape men. Intriguingly, the mine at Prairie Creek is mere miles from the South Nahanni River's Big Bend and immediately north of Deadmen's Valley, as well as but a short distance from Lafferty Creek, so named after Annie and her alleged bizarre disappearance. Even more interesting is how mineralization was discovered at Prairie Creek in 1928 by Paul Field, the cousin by marriage of the very same Annie who stumbled through the wilderness for 9 days in search of the missing girl. Such a dreadful experience, it would seem, was not enough to scare him away. And so one must wonder why people are warned to keep away from Nahanni Valley. Is it to preserve nature? To keep the public safe from savage entities? Or could there be another, more material explanation? Without the ability to verify precisely what happened and what did not happen in the so-called Deadmen's Valley, it is impossible to say. Thank you for watching. Truly, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more of the paranormal. And if you cannot wait until my next video, why not watch the one suggested on screen now? Until next time,